Once a year I brush cut it, and this is a wonderful haven for insects and filled with bee balm. And actually I put in a wildflower bed here originally, and I noticed that some of the flowers in the wildflower bed were starting to hop out into the back meadow, and so that's when I decided to encourage that. So every year I do a little Johnny Appleseed and pull seed heads off of the flowers that I like and spread them out into the meadow, and the meadow has really taken off since then. And every year it shifts a little bit in its biology. So it took several years for milkweed to come in, for instance, and naturally found its way. We used to have a lot of brown-eyed Susans. Those are all gone now. The bee balm seems to really be dominant, but we're also getting a lot of goldenrod coming in, and that seems to be driving out some things as well. So it's a little hard to say how this will look in several years, but it does get a little scrubby if I don't come out and cut down some of the trees that try to grow, like oaks and maples and the honeysuckle and a few invasive species like sweet autumn, I think is what it's called. So I try to keep that under control manually. And our apple tree, and we first, a couple years after we moved in, I built this bench around it so we can come out and sit down by it. But as you can imagine, with this yard, I don't sit in it very often as I'm busy working on the bed. So we don't sit on this bench as often as I'd like, but it's still a nice place to come out for a few minutes. Sometimes in the summer, we'll have breakfast out here, and it's nice and quiet in the neighborhood. And then in this spot also is the solar panel. And the solar panel we had put in 06, and is a 2,000 watt setup that, see if I can pan back so you can see the solar panel from the front. Generates a little over 2,000 watts from a peak exposure, and it's mounted on a pole that's about 12 feet tall, and the ladder is out next to it because I get up and manually turn it to track the sun throughout the day. And so the solar panel right now generates about 60 to 85% of our electricity depending on our usage and the weather. So we're pretty happy about that. And along the side here in the back meadow, I put in a whole row of forsythias about 5 or 8 years ago, and they've really started to size up now, give us a really nice spring show, and help to block off some of the neighbors. The neighbors have a wide open mowed lawn that's not very, well, it's not very interesting to look at. So I've been trying to block off some of the neighbors, and partly to shield them as well from our yard. If they like it nice and neat, they probably don't want to see all of my scrubby meadow, so it gives them a little block as well. And in the very, very back, there's a bunch of trees that I've been planting. I've put in all these trees over the last decade or so. I started putting in trees the first year we moved in here, and I've been doing it ever since. There's a variety of trees now that have gotten quite tall. This is a catalpa that I got from my neighbor who passed away several years ago, so that's always a nice memory of Joe. And several of these trees in the back I got from one of my bosses at a former job. She gave me that Colorado blue spruce. Some of these trees, like this Douglas fir, are former Christmas trees. We dig them up live, and then we put them in the spring, and I had very good success with that, and several of the trees out here are descendants from that. Another blue spruce. I got this hemlock in the back that's really starting to get big from my former boss, Pat Vidham, so I always think of her whenever I come back, take a look at that. But not all the trees I've put in have done so well. This is a pawpaw tree. I put in 2 that I'd gotten, I forget, by mail order, I think, and one of them died, and the other one, well, 3 years later still looks like that. So it's taking its time getting big, but once it gets about 3 or 4 more feet tall, I'll probably buy another one the same height of it, and then we can get some fruit. I've heard pawpaw fruits are quite interesting, but you need 2 for cross-pollination. So coming back out of the meadow, take a little walk by the garden. The garden is a little bit unconventional by most people's standards. I read a book on no-till, or the no-work garden, and she just composts directly onto the garden. And so that's what I do, and I find it's a lot easier than trying to have a separate compost bed. So all the yard waste just gets put right on the garden and spread out, and then that way I don't have to weed as much, and I don't have to deal with moving compost and turning it and aerating it, and the soil underneath is really fantastic actually. Now I've been doing this for several years. And in the back, of course, I have tomatoes and peas and some squash, and I put in some cabbage, and Tanya's very fond of Brussels sprouts, so I put in some Brussels sprouts in the back, and then there's some kale that's just starting to size up now, although it looks like it's being eaten a little bit by some beetles. And then I moved some strawberries over here. I haven't mulched these yet. I got to mulch these so they keep the weeds down. So I moved some strawberries in from another spot in the yard so they can get a little more sun. And this is usually the pumpkin pile or squash pile, whatever it is. So this is just a big mound I let kind of get crazy. And then I put some pumpkins on it, which seem to suppress their own weeds or compete at least well with them. And this pile is quite fertile, and they seem to like the elevation and the warmth that it gives them. But definitely gives me a spot where I can just dump all sorts of stuff that I don't really care about, and doesn't bother them. So there's some zucchini and summer squash and a sugar pumpkin planted in there, and I think an ornamental pumpkin, and those will eventually sprawl out, and they'll cover this whole bed, and probably start sprawling out into this mowed area as well and cover that completely. And walking back towards the yard, see some refuse that fell out of the wheelbarrow. This path, so I mow a path all the way through the meadow on both sides so that you can come out and appreciate it without getting all ticky or scratched up by the twigs and debris that might be underneath all of that. But you can see from this side the milkweed's just starting to come into bloom right now, and it's very fragrant. And last year we had very good success attracting quite a few monarch butterflies to the yard, which was very nice. We get tiger swallows and a couple other butterfly species I don't recognize by common name right off the hand. But often once the bee balm all comes in, about 80% of what you see is bee balm out here. Once this comes into bloom, it's a huge attractor for all sorts of wasps and hummingbird moths and a crazy assortment actually of butterflies and moths. Very nice display, which is zero maintenance because I didn't even brush cut this last year. All I did was go out and chop out some trees. So the area that you see here is pretty much maintaining itself, and it looks great. I recommend wildflowers to everybody. And that concludes our tour of the yard. Hopefully you'll get a chance to see it in person someday.